Hello and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. Again, my name's Matt Gordon. I'm excited to go through the 2024 NHL Draft with you guys. Tonight's proceedings are going to be a little different. I'm going to do a top 20 of draft prospects and things like that I think the order will go this year, as well as more information with some future draft picks and some future studs that you're going to see in the upcoming next few years. Again, as always, feel free to leave your comments, all the chats, everything in the bottom of your chat. I'll respond to all the questions on the live chat, and just super excited to get everybody on here. I'm going to wait a couple minutes for a couple more people to come on, and we'll get started here in a minute. As a reminder, feel free to leave your comments in the chat below, and I'll answer them one by one. I'll click on them as I go on through the live stream today. So just letting you guys know that. Again, if this is your first time following us on any sort of platform, welcome. If you could follow me on YouTube, obviously, if you're here, it's Hidden Hockey. Hit the subscribe button. If you're on Instagram, feel free to let me know. Follow me on Instagram as well. And then, hi, Mom. And anything else, feel free to comment on the chat below. So we'll get started here. So for the first, we're going to go into my top 20 of this year's draft that I think are going to be, the picks in terms of, the top 20 in here. So I'm going to start off with number 20. Number 20 for me is Aaron Kivi-Harhu. Aaron Kivi-Harhu, interesting prospect. Originally was a number one overall for me and for a lot of other people, 18 to 24 months ago. Since then, he's had a couple knee injuries. Hasn't really played a ton, and when he has played, he hasn't really scored much. And with him already being undersized and having mobility issues and different other things, it's really dropped his draft stock a lot. I could see him falling out of the first round. I could also see him falling out of the second and third even. Just depends on what team really swings on his upside, because he was a highly touted kid, from the ages of 9 and 10, really, really talented hockey player that unfortunately has just not caught the breaks that he needs to. And, I'm still bullish on him. I think he's going to be an interesting prospect, and I think he will have an NHL career. But I have him slotted at 20 for this very reason. I think there is a really high upside with him if he can get everything together, but it's just a matter of finding those next steps for Aaron Kivi-Harhu. So we'll move on here to number 19. Number 19, I have Emil Hemming. Emil Hemming is a very interesting player. He's gone up and down on my list a lot. Depending on who you talk to, you can see this guy being in the top 15. You got others that put him in the late first round. Really high-end hockey sense, decent skater, not amazing, but he really brings it at the pro level. I think he adjusted a little bit to the pro level this year, found his game a little bit towards the latter half of the year, and I think at 19, this is a really good pick for Vegas. He's going to fit right into their overall slot and their overall system, and I'm very curious to see where he'll go from here. So number 18 is Sam O'Reilly from the London Knights. He came in and he had a really good Memorial Cup, in my opinion. I got a chance to watch him a couple times in Saginaw, and I really liked his tenacity. I think the game and the way he plays, he's just been he's a very, very good player and somebody who, to me, screams pro upside. There's a lot of potential out of him. I think there's a lot of skill that has yet to be tapped into, but I've watched this kid now on multiple levels, at the GOJ level and Junior B, as well as at the OHL level with the London Knights. And every time I've watched him, I've loved his tenacity. I've loved the fire he plays with, and I think he's got some more offense that is yet to be tapped. Putting him with a guy like Connor Bedard and Frank Nazar and these other offensive prospects will really bring out his overall potential and his upside. And I'm really excited to see him at 18 here. And I think he'll be probably around that range around draft time. Number 17, one of the more divisive prospects, Trevor Connolly. He went on to play some USHL hockey this year, and he did really well. And then internationally, he really dominated in all the international tournaments he could play for this year. The biggest thing, obviously, is he's since reformed, obviously, from the mistakes he made when he was 14 years old, as well as some other coaching things he did when he was at a younger age. Hopefully maturity wins out with this player. I think in terms of skill and upside, he's definitely a top, he's even a top 10, maybe even a top 5 pick in this draft normally with no character issues. But these are things you have to look at and wonder and say, hey, listen, is this guy mature enough to be in a pro locker room? And if so, does he take a little longer than you expect for a high-end draft pick? I think Trevor Connolly, to me, he screams top 5, top 10 skill, very high-end finisher, great playmaker, really, really good skater. I think he's one of the better skaters in this draft, in my opinion, in terms of his edge work, as well as the creativity he has in his skating. It's all up to Trevor, though, in terms of his upside and what he can bring to the table. So at 16, we have Maxim Massé, QMJHL player. To me, he's far and away the best QMJHL kid that's available. It's a weaker year for the Q in terms of draft talent. They don't really have as high end of a group as they normally do. And that's a real bummer for the group there. And I think to me, there's a lot. He really played well. He's had 2 really good scoring seasons in the QMJHL. To me, he's going to be relied upon to be a really high-end contributor in the top 6 of whatever junior team he plays for, whether he stays with his current team or he goes on to, get traded later on in the season. I think he's just got a lot of potential. To me, I think any team would be really happy to have him. I'm super bullish on him here at 16. A lot of people have him more towards the 2nd, 3rd round. But for me, Maxim Massé brings a lot more to his game. I think he's one of the more underrated players in this draft. Number 15, obviously the Detroit Red Wings here. I went with Henry Muse. I think Henry Muse is another guy, really super high-end offensive defenseman. Great skater. He has the offensive ability as well. He was a forward at one point in time. Plays with Ottawa 67s in the OHL. And he did a really good job at leading their power play. He was a top 4 defenseman for them. I'm really excited to see his progress and his potential, see where he can grow. And, for me, he's perfect for Detroit's looking for in a system. You look with guys like Sider and Edvinson, and, you have other puck movers like Sandin Palika. You got, potentially William Wallinder if he develops the way he's intended to. And then you add a guy like Henry Muse and Shai Bouillon and a few others. And you got yourself a lot of different people who can move the puck and can skate really well. To me, he fits right in the dynamic of a Detroit Red Wing, and I'm very, very curious to see where he's going to go. Again, I have him super, super high compared to his normal ranking. I think had things worked out better for him in his draft season, he could have been in the top 15, and I actually value him a lot more than some other guys as well. Number 14, I have Ryder Ritchie. Yes, he's related to the Ritchie that played in the NHL. I can't think of his name right now, but another kid out of the Western Hockey League. Very tough kid, very focused kid. I would say more of a power forward type. Doesn't necessarily have anything that wows you, but he's very safe in terms of his upside. I think at the very least, he's a really competent third liner, chip in with some offense. Have been told he's got a great shot. I haven't really got a ton of viewings of him, but everything I've read about him and everything I've heard about him seems to me that he's a guy who's slipped under the radar quite a bit. And to me, I think there's a lot more potential, a lot more skill out of there. And I think Ryder Ritchie fits in that mold and fits in to be a top 15 pick. Again, a lot of people have him outside the first. Even some of them have him as low as 2021. we'll see how it goes, but I think he's going to surprise some people, and I think the pro upside as well as the pedigree he has is going to shoot him up the boards. Uh, and San Jose would land him. Number 13, Liam Greentree, a kid who absolutely carried Windsor this year. Another OHL kid, has went from being considered for the draft, maybe in the mid rounds, to an instant top 15 pick. Teams, I'm sure public boards have him a little lower than he should. I think teams will have this kid in the top 10. I think Minnesota, being the drafting sleuths that they are, they're going to love to get Greentree here at 13. Has everything you could want. Very good all-around player. Great tenacity. I think his upside is really impressive, and I think there's some top-line skill that can be done with, adding in the likes of Marco Rossi potentially, or Marat Kuznetsov, or some other prospects that might step in and really take some high-end roles as well. Love to see what he brings to the table. I really like the savviness and the draft strategy of the Minnesota Wild, and I think they'll go right ahead and slam the door and really make the pick on Liam Greentree here. Number 12, this is a kid who I'm incredibly bullish on, Camille Bednarik. To me, he is way underrated compared to what he should be at. I compare him a lot to Dylan Larkin. Good skater, very tenacious on pucks. I like that he brings a little offensive game as well. He's not going to blow you away offensively, but he will control the ice with his skating, control the ice with his overall mind. And this is a kid to me who you have no misses on this kid. I think everything he does at a pro level. And he's somebody that you could really look at and determine, hey, this kid could really shoot up the boards here. And I think a lot of teams have this kid ranked way higher than they do publicly. I think at 12, it's incredibly bullish for me to think that he'll be 12. But I think some teams are going to really look at him, and don't be surprised if he shoots up on draft day, because I think he will. And I think it's just a real good potential here with Philly here at 12. They get a player that's to me, I think a carbon copy of Dylan Larkin, and somebody who I could see the Philadelphia Flyers really drafting and pairing with a Matvei Michkov. Number 11, Sam Dickinson, another London Knight. To me, the top-ranked London Knight out of this draft. They got a few guys that are going to go, but for me, Sam Dickinson, a lot of people have him in the top 5. Some even have him as high as 3. I personally don't see that upside with him. I think he's a really good player. I think he's going to be a good top 4 defenseman. There's some things I worry about in his game, but his skating is one of the best skaters in the draft. I think, putting him with a guy like Levshunov, putting him with a guy like Parikh or Bouillon or Yakimchuk or any of those guys, I think Dickinson compares favorably, if not better, than most of them in terms of his skating. I think his offensive game is pretty good, but I wish he would be a little more demonstrative in the offensive zone. I noticed in the couple games I've watched to him, he comes in, he skates really well, he can get injuries, no issue whatsoever. It's when he gets into the entry spots that's where he has trouble. He's not necessarily offensively gifted. I think he tends to defer to pass. He passes up a lot of open shot opportunities, and the shot opportunities he does take often get blocked. So he's going to work on getting shots through traffic. But a big kid at 6'4" and 203 really brings a high-end upside to his game. I love the potential that's in this player, and I think Buffalo really likes this pick at 11 and runs the table with it. Going into the top 10 now, New Jersey Devils with this pick, I think Tarek Parashak is going to be in the top 10 here this draft. This is a kid he was a rookie to the Western Hockey League this year, came from the U18 loop in the Scholastic League and the CSSHL, and came in. He was a leading scorer out of that league, came into the Western Hockey League, and people, I think, had concerns about his translatability and his ability to score goals, and those have been quelled very quickly. Parashak is a kid with a high-end shot. Decent skating. I think the skating needs a little bit of work, but it's definitely pro. There's pro potential within his skating. The big thing you're getting here is a guy who could score goals and can also play make. I think his high-end offensive upside is comparable to that of a Trevor Connolly. I think Tarek Parashak has a better overall game than Connolly does. I think he's very defensively responsible as well, which leads me to put him in the top 10. This is a guy who I think is going to rise upwards. A lot of people, Tarek Parashak was, outside of their top 200 probably a year and a half ago. And now we look and Tarek Parashak has proved what you can do at the Western Hockey League level and how much he can score. He put up over 100 points this year, did a lot of things to make his game dynamic, and I think he's a really impressive player. So number 9 for me, the Calgary Flames, they take their token son. They take Tija Ginla. Tija Ginla is an absolute riser in the best sense of the word. A lot of people had him, obviously with the Ginla name, he was tracked, he was understood and recognized. But what an awesome player. Great high-end skill. The work ethic's there, the character's there. If he could borrow from his dad, Jerome, I think there's so much potential for this kid, and the sky's the limit for him. I think Calgary is going to take him and run with him, and they'll hire Jerome to make sure that he's monitored at every point in time. And, Tija Ginla is a guy who can't miss. He's just a really great player. I think he fits here at 9. I don't see the high end, 80 to 90 points score out of Tija Ginla, but I do see a very, very safe projection for Tija Ginla to be in the 50, 60 point range by the time he hits his prime with great leadership and good ability. I think he's like Jerome in certain aspects, but he's not. I don't think he'll ever put up the production that Jerome does. I think Tija's a really good player, though, and somebody who every team in the National Hockey League would want. All 32 teams want this kid. Well, soon to be 33. All 33 teams are going to want this kid and then some. Number 8 here, Michael Hayes. Michael Hayes, to me, is one of the more underrated prospects in this draft pool. High-end offense through and through. He showed that at the GTHL level. Came over to the USHL and really struggled. Dealt with a lot of family issues as well. He has, his dad had passed away, pretty recently, and that had caused a lot of issues for him in the early parts of the season. Adjusting to life in Chicago, and then also committing to the University of Michigan as well during that time frame. Putting a lot of pressure within himself, but he still performed when the time came. Obviously in his D2 year and his D-1 year, dealt with a lot of injuries, and I think that limited some viewings as well as limited his potential development. But Michael, to me, is a guy who, you either have it or you don't, and he's got that high-end offensive thought. This is one of the better playmaking forwards in the draft. I think he's a guy who will put up 30 goals in the National Hockey League. I could see 40 or 50 assists out of this kid, and I think the upside, when everything comes together, is very impressive. I compare him similarly to a James Van Riemsdyk in terms of how his game is, the skill he has, the smarts he has, and the way he skates. I think they're very similar, and there's a lot to love. And obviously, having been teammates with Macklin Celebrini in the past, he was sure to get some production as well from that. But a great player on his own right. Seattle will be happy to steal him at 8, and I think this is a aggressive ranking, but something that I believe you bet on upside here, and you bet on him in the top 10. Number 7 for me is Berkeley Catton. Berkeley Catton comes from Spokane of the Western Hockey League. Berkeley is an absolute unit. He started at Shattuck. He was another kid, similar to Aaron Kiviar, who had a lot of hype from the time he was 13 or 14 years old. Has lived up to the hype a little better than Aaron has. But obviously there's been a ton of development and a ton of people around him that have grown in their own skill sets as well. But Berkeley is a very good player in his own right. There was talks in the past about him maybe getting, consideration for exceptional status had he applied. I think he's an absolute all-around great forward, somebody who you could build a franchise around. He's not an absolute, he's not a Celebrini type in terms of how you can bet on the upside and everything like that, but he's a very good player in his own right, somebody who you can use to supplement your overall game and find some more offense. And I think pairing him with a guy like Brady Tkachuk, Ridley Gregg, those type of players, I think is going to really bring out the best in him, because then he can work on just scoring goals and putting away pucks. Great player. Really like the high-end offense. He put up over 100 points just like Parashak did this year. He actually even had more than that. I think he had 124 points, I think, this year for Spokane. Really impressive player. Love his game, love his ability, and he would be a dream at 7 here for a lot of teams. Number 6, I think Utah gets lucky, and I think the slide happens with the Russians. I think Ivan Demidov is a guy who can bring a lot of skill, a lot of potential to this unit. And it's a great guy to start their program with. Ivan, to me, is a really high offensive, creative player. I think he struggled at the pro level this year a little bit. I didn't like how his dynamism didn't really translate from the junior level. I think there's a lot of potential, a lot of skill that still has to be brought out of him in order to be successful at the pro level. I think he will need some KHL time. But, give him 2 years and give him a really solid environment. I think he'll be able to develop into a really high-end offensive player. I don't see a Kucherov here with him, so that's why I didn't rank him at 2 or 3. I don't even really see like a Kovalchuk or anything like that, but what I do see is a really smart player. I see a guy who, to me, is a step below what you would see out of a premier Russian superstar. But I like him. I think he could be a Tarasenko type player. I think he's got that ability. He's, instead of shooting though, he's a better playmaker. But he really struggled. He was in a rock and a hard place because he really dominated the Russian Junior League, but he struggled at the KHL level, and he didn't want to play the VHL level. So, to me, I think there's a lot of skill, a lot of potential with Ivan Demidov, but he has to realize it himself, and I think he will in Utah. Number 5, Zane Parekh. So Zane Parekh fits in like a glove to the setup that Montreal has. Montreal is going to obviously have Lane Hudson. They're going to have Juraj Slafkovsky. They're going to have Cole Caulfield. They're going to have an embarrassment of riches offensively and defensively. And you add in a guy like Zane Parekh to that mix, I think Montreal will lose their minds. Zane Parekh, to me, is the most offensively gifted defenseman in this draft. He absolutely reminds me of a better Jamie Drysdale. I watched Jamie Drysdale. I watched some other guys in their 16-year-old year and their 17-year-old year. And I've watched 2 or 3 games now of Zane Parekh. And Zane Parekh brings it every single night. He's one of the better rover prospects that we've had since Kel McCarr. You can put him in that McCarr, Dahlin, that kind of air. I think he's of that ability, that skill level. And I love his skating ability. I think he's so smart on his skates. I think his head for the game is really impressive. He knows when to pinch. He knows when to close. He's very good at filling his gaps. I just love his skill. There's not a weakness in his game. I think defensively, a lot of people have said that he's not the greatest defender, but I think those concerns really honestly are overblown. I see a guy who, to me, looks like a top-pair defenseman, one of the few in this draft, and I think he really brings an upside even more than Dickinson does in terms of his overall game, and that's why I ranked him here at 5. A lot of teams are bullish on him as well, but I think Parekh, you got to take the upside ahead of whatever inherent risks there are. I don't see any, but the public scouting community seems to see a few of them. Number 4 to me, and this is going to be really controversial, but it wouldn't have been a while back, is Cole Eiserman. Played for the U.S. National Development Program this year. Very skilled player. Really just one of the best scorers we've probably ever seen in any of the drafts. I love his shot. I love the way he goes about his game. I love the focus he brings. There are times where he goes missing, but the times when he's really on and really firing, he's a can't miss prospect at that point. Obviously, he had 85 goals this year, broke Cole Caulfield's record for scoring as well, and just, has proven to be an absolute superstar in terms of scoring ability. I think the advantages he had as a kid to score in the bunches he did has started to fade. I think he, can still do it a little bit at the junior level, but once he hits the pro circuit, there's going to be a lot to learn for him. And, for him going to Minnesota next year, he's going to learn a lot at the college game. He's not going to have the space USHL, and he's going to have to find it with his goal scoring ability. But that goal scoring ability is something that's an absolutely elite trait. You can't ignore it. He brings it every time. There's multiple evidences of him doing this. He just has the skill and the ability to score goals. And that is the hardest thing to do in the National Hockey League, score goals. So Cole Yzerman, welcome to Columbus. Number 3, I think Konsta Helenius is a guy who is incredibly underrated in this draft, and I think you're going to see why when Pat Verbeek goes off the board and selects him. Konsta Helenius has proven it at a pro level for a year and a half now. He's one of the better pro prospects in this draft in terms of his readiness, his ability to step in the NHL lineup. I think Konsta Helenius, given a year, can come into the National Hockey League, play with the Leo Carlsons, play with the various other prospects they have in that system, and really bring out a great game out of them. People say he's short, he's 5'11". People say he's light, he's 190. People say the offensive ability is limited. He goes out and he plays well in the Finnish league. Everything he's proven to be has shown up again and again and again. I think he's an incredible talent, somebody you can't miss the board on, and that's why I have him at 3. Some people have him as low as 15. I would reevaluate why they do what they do, because Konsta Helenius, to me, has every single attribute you can want out of a player to play in the league immediately and right now. He's going to take – I think he personally needs another year, but I wouldn't be surprised if Anaheim went and said, you can come into the National Hockey League. We believe in you. Number 2, Artem Levshinov. This was a kid I'm incredibly bullish on. Him and Zane Parekh, to me, are both guys who could be 1 and 2 defensemen in this draft. I just think, there's so much to like about this kid's game. And, he's pro ready. He's, very, his stamina is impressive. He's putting up 25, 26-minute nights, no issue. Played at Michigan State, played at the college level, average point per game, just like William did. But I think the way in which Artem Levshinov carries himself and the way he plays his game is so mature. I think he's going to step into the National Hockey League and be very, very ready for what he's able to do in the National Hockey League. There's so much to like about what Artem Levshinov brings to the game. I think there's so much potential in terms of what he can bring. He will carry that offense in Chicago for 15 years. I think he's such an awesome pro. He brings it every time. The Russian factor is not an issue. He's been in North America for 3 years now, and every time I watch him, he gets better and better and better. And I've never seen such progression pre-draft from a prospect like I have Artem Levshinov. And then finally, your number 1 overall pick would be Macklin Celebrini. Macklin Celebrini, to me, is far and away the number 1 overall. He just brings an exceptional factor to his game. I think he's just, the 40-goal upside is there for him. I think he can put up 100 points in the National Hockey League. His game, his tenacity, everything he brings onto the ice is something that's going to really draw people to him. San Jose is going to love him paired with Will Smith. You get him combined with a lot of different players. Eventually, maybe move him with William Eklund. They got a great, great potential for him. And, of course, he's from California anyway. His dad, Rick, is the performance director for the Golden State Warriors. So he's got those resources already in hand. Now he goes to a San Jose team where he can be carefully watched and carefully analyzed and, really taken care of in a way that fits best for him and his family. And that's a huge unintended development that comes out of this stuff. You have to appreciate what he brings on the ice. There's no weaknesses whatsoever. I think, the sky's the limit for a guy like Macklin Celebrini. So we're going to jump back now. I'm going to go stop my screen. We'll bounce back here. So obviously there's a lot to talk about there in terms of the different prospects, the different potential players that we've had here to talk about with the 2024 draft. In terms of overagers, different players, there's a lot of different people. We'll start with the 04 class. I don't believe any 03s are going to get selected in this draft. I'd be very surprised if they did. If so, and they end up getting drafted, they obviously have to immediately sign their ELC, and then the development time will take over from that point in time. But we shall see. I don't think that's going to happen, but weirder things have happened. I will say that. So we're going to go now into some overage prospects that I think are going to really impress here. So an 04 prospect that I think could be a draft eligible player is Dylan Harokian. Plays for Northeastern, and this is a kid who I think he could be in the second to third round. I really like his overall game. I love the skill he has. I wish there was a little, he obviously brings the offense, but I wish there was a little more, overall potential that he could bring. To me, he's a little limited now, being 20 years old. I don't know that the AHL time he would need would allow him to become an effective professional hockey player, but we shall see what happens with Dylan Harokian. Another 04 that I think could get drafted as well is Yon Loshing. Plays in the Quebec League. Could be an overage prospect that you look at and say he might swing in the fourth to fifth round. I think somebody will bet on his upside. I personally have him around this, the late second, just based on what I like and what he brings to the table. But we shall see what happens there in terms of, his overall skill and his potential as well. Jonathan Labainen is another guy. He's a Finnish player. I think he, to me, looks like a mid-round prospect as well. I think there's a lot to like out of him, a lot of skill, a lot of potential out of him as well. Has proven it now at the pro level. So I think teams are more willing to take the upside on from a guy like Jonathan Labainen. Some other 04s that might get looked at. Nicolas Baudouin is a guy who plays in the AJHL. He will play at Alaska Fairbanks in the NCAA. There will be a late round pick probably on him. Can't say I've watched him a lot, but I do like what I hear about his overall game, his overall impact on the game, and what he can bring on, on an everyday basis on the ice. Another guy in Antonin Verreau. This is a small guy. He's about 5'8", 170 pounds, but he brings a ton of potential, great skill, good ability to the ice. He's proven it time and again in the Quebec League, but we'll see what happens in terms of his overall game and what teams are willing to bet on a guy who's 5'8", and 170 pounds. I think Antonin Verreau is a guy who, in the late rounds, is a great pick for any team because I think he will immediately step into the AHL. He'll find development time, and I think he'll be able to become a better prospect than I think a lot of people realize. And then going into some overagers as well that I think could warrant some top 3 round consideration. Benjamin Roitinen is a guy who plays out of Finland. He plays for Tappara. Really high-end player as well. I think he should have been drafted probably in the first 3 rounds last year. I was stunned when he wasn't picked. I actually have him as high as the second round. I think there's a ton of potential with this kid. He went to Toronto's development camp. Surprised he wasn't signed out of there. But now he's playing at the pro level, and he's done a really good job at the pro level. He's put up comparable production to Consta Hellenius. But we'll see, what comes out of that. I think he's a guy who they swung and missed on, a guy like him. Another guy to look at from an overage perspective is Logan Warmold. Plays for Kamloops in the Western Hockey League. I think Logan Warmold, to me, brings, again, another small guy at about 5'10", but he's really tough. Brings kind of a Nathan Gerby kind of toughness to his ability with his size. At the very minimum, to me, he's a checking line forward. I don't see top 6 upside with him, which is why I think his upside is limited and maybe why he wasn't drafted last year. But I think he's improved his game enough to where he does warrant at least a 5th or 6th round pick for Logan Warmold. And then the last guy I want to focus in on is a guy who I think is another, 05. It's another, potential player that I think could get drafted. And his name is Mark Seaver. He plays in the Swiss League for the Junior A system over there. And to me, this is a guy who's put up a point per game in the Swiss Junior A League. He's, got some limited upside. I think he can really bring up his trajectory. He might be a guy who might make sense for the CHL import. draft and could come over to North America and really prove to scouts that he is of the ability to play in North American pro leagues. I think Mark Seaver is a guy who will fit that mold. And I think there's a longer development track with him, but there's a lot to like there out of Mark Seaver as well. And then finally, just a couple other picks that I think could be really interesting in the later rounds. One guy in particular is Aiden Park out of the U.S. development program. Aiden Park, to me, I have him in the late first, actually. He's not in my top 20, but he was in that general census. Every game I've watched this kid, I've watched like 4 or 5 games of him. I think he brings it every single night. Every time he plays, he's super tenacious. He's got great bloodlines. Richard Park was his dad, who played more than 10 years in the National Hockey League. He brought a lot of potential, a lot of skill to his overall game. And, there's just a lot to like with a guy in Aiden Park. A couple other guys that I want to mention, or 3 other players, actually. So another sleeper to look at, played for the Brooks Bandits this year. His name's Logan Sawyer. Logan Sawyer, to me, is a guy who is quickly rising up the ranks. I think he's a guy who could potentially fit into, maybe even the 2nd or 3rd round. We'll see. Logan Sawyer, though, is a great offensive player, brings a high-end offensive upside. Really like his skill, his potential. Everything he brings on the ice is super impressive. I see a really, maybe a longer development track. He was a little bit slower to develop, but he's taken off in strides. So Logan Sawyer to me is a really savvy pick in the later 2nd, maybe 3rd round. Another guy who, these are 2 guys now I'm going to mention that I think are both going to be targeted by the Detroit Red Wings because they fit so well under the Detroit Red Wings development scheme. One guy who I believe has a relation to Henrik Zetterberg is Alexander Zetterberg. Plays for Timrå in in the Swedish Hockey League. Timrå is the same affiliate that Henrik Zetterberg came from. He's also from the same hometown as Henrik Zetterberg in Jarunda, Sweden. So I believe they're cousins. I'm not 100% sure, but this is a kid who's 5'8", about 160 pounds. But my gosh, is the offensive creativity unbelievable. He really brings in a high offensive game. He dominated at the under 18 level. He's going to be a guy I think might get some under 20 consideration even for the World Juniors. Lots to like there with Alex Zetterberg. And to me, I think, betting on the upside, to me, he's a 1st round pick. I don't care that he's 5'8". I don't care he's 170 pounds. The skill, the ability, the effort, the skating, everything he brings in a package, to me, screams 1st round pick. I think he'll probably be in the 2nd round. He's ranked around 45 to 70, depending on what scouting service you're looking at. But there's a lot to like there out of him. And then finally, the ultimate sleeper, the pick that everybody's going to freak out about when it happens, is Charlie Forsland. And Charlie Forsland played in Falu, which is the Hockey Etan, there's the SHL, the Allsvenskan, and then the Hockey Etan, which is the 3rd tier of Swedish hockey. And this kid has gone and proven a ton of scouts wrong in terms of his ability and his game. Nobody had heard of this guy before, 4 or 5 months ago. And now he's got some serious consideration for some late round picks. I look at him similar to like a Liam Kirk. Liam Kirk was a guy who played from, Great Britain and, eventually found himself drafted in the 7th round with Arizona. I think there's a lot of really good upside with this kid. I've watched film of this guy, the limited film that there is out there of him. I think he's a really great player. I think the upside's huge. I think there's a lot of development time and opportunity for this guy. It just depends on what you're looking at and how you're feeling about the player. I think the sky's the limit, though, with him, and I really like the overall skill and potential that's brought in here. Again, thanks for those that have tuned in so far. Obviously, I have a few people in here. Feel free to obviously leave any comments, questions, chats in the chat below. I would love to, obviously hear any questions related to the 24 draft, or even if you wanted to talk future draft picks in 25, 26, so on and so forth. I'd love to hear from you guys. One thing I didn't mention was goalies. It's a weaker draft for goalies this year. I don't really like the overall goalie makeup. If I had to pick a top goalie, um, it's even hard to say. I don't really know that I would have one. I have a couple ranked, but I doubt they're going to get picked. It's just personally what I've seen in my viewings and what I've watched that, they're of this draft year. So I don't know if, they'll get looked at necessarily. But, I think they're worth a shot in my opinion. I will be doing some additional draft coverage leading up to the draft on Friday. I will do another live stream like this on Friday as well. Feel free to join me in the live chat if you're watching this on recording. Hope to see you on Friday. And if you have never viewed the content or you're just now viewing it for the first time, thanks for jumping on. Greatly appreciate you going and supporting the content, and really excited for the 2024 NHL Draft. Again, if you like my top 20, feel free to leave some comments below. If you have any controversial takes about it, feel free to leave those below as well. Again, as always, thank you so much for tuning in to my draft preview show, and feel free to leave any comments in the chat or anything below. But until then, see you and have a good day.